It is 10 to 7. Planning reform is at the heart of the new government's growth agenda. Rachel Reeves is giving a speech about that this morning. We were, of course, warned about this. Labour have spoken about the issue for well over a year. We read this morning that mandatory local house building targets are back. Planning restrictions on the uglier parts of the green belt will be relaxed, though what counts as ugly is still to be determined, and an end to the de facto ban on onshore wind turbines. Let's speak in the first instance to Zach Simons, who's planning barrister at Landmark Chambers and runs an influential planning blog called Planerax. Morning, Zach.
Good morning.
So how radical do these plans seem to you?
The changes that are reported in today's papers are important, but they aren't radical, with one possible exception that I'll get to in a moment. First, what's changing? This is not, as the Times calls it today, a change to any planning laws. It's not a change to any planning rules. What's on the table is a change to policy. Our National Planning Policy Framework, which is the 80-odd page synthesis of the government's overall approach to sustainable development, and that it's policy and not law, matters, not least because it can be changed quickly and it can be changed without months of voting in Parliament. How's it going to change? Most of the changes that are reported this morning are about going back to what we've had before, quite recently, in earlier versions of the framework. Some of them are more about messaging, or at least as much about messaging as they are about substance. And to take one example, the Daily Telegraph's front page headline this morning talks about bringing back mandatory housing targets. All that Labour's suggesting today is going back to an approach to housing targets that Theresa May's government had in 2018. And under that approach, the so-called mandatory housing targets, which Michael Gove was said to relax last year, were never actually mandatory to begin with. Some of the other changes are long overdue. We're going back to an approach to onshore wind from the earlier part of the David Cameron coalition government. We obviously never should have imposed an embargo on onshore wind in the middle of an energy and climate crisis. If there is anything radical in here, it's possibly mooted changes to greenbelt policy. It's an area of planning policy, as we've spoken about before, that hasn't really been touched since it was introduced in 1955. We're told that something's coming today, or over the next week or so, to put meat on the bones of Labour's grey belt idea. We'll see what it says. But a material change to policy in that area could have profound, new and radical consequences.
But could it help Labour hit these very ambitious housing targets, that bit alone, the redefining of the green belt as partly grey belt?
Necessary but not sufficient. It's important, but it's nowhere near enough. Labour's housing targets are enormous. They suggest building at a level that we've not reached since 1977, in circumstances where all of the leading indicators are going down, not up. So planning applications, planning permissions, housing starts, housing completions, down, 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 down. So what we're talking about today is an important step, a first step, but it's only a step. And if you think this stuff's controversial, you ain't seen nothing yet. We're talking about a potential generation of new towns, strategic planning, a full review of the green belt, lots more fundamental changes to national policy, but that's going to take longer.
So if this national planning policy framework is the bit that is easy to change because it's policy and not law, what is it in there? What would you like to see in there that would actually allow Labour to hit that target, 1.5 million homes?
One thing, starting point, that would be really useful to make clear, and I've no idea what's in the document, we'll all find out in the next week or two. In 2015, the then Housing Minister, Brandon Lewis, said that unmet needs for things like housing would be unlikely to clearly outweigh harm to the green belt in the planning balance. And so housing applications in those circumstances would be unlikely to hit the threshold they'd need to meet in order to get planning permission. That statement that he made to Parliament's never been part of formal national planning policy, but it's never been revoked. It's still there. It's still on the books. It's completely at odds with this government's agenda. It should be scrapped. I think it should be scrapped explicitly, and the framework should confirm that the opposite is true, which is to say that the needs which are generated by our profound housing crisis can, not always will, but can outweigh harm to the green belt so as to justify new housing development.
All right, Zach Simon.